The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT
820. I'm thrilled to be joined again by Tamar Jacoby. She's the Kyiv-based director of the Progressive Policy Institute's New Ukraine Project. She came to that post from a distinguished career as a journalist and an author. We spoke, 6 months ago about the future of Ukraine, and we didn't just focus on the war. We spent time on the country's struggles to become a stronger civil society, a more robust democracy, and to, overcome the endemic corruption of a post-Soviet state. But much has changed since then. Welcome back, for one. I hope.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
How are you? What's the mood like in Kyiv?
I'm well, thanks. I'm actually out of the country this week, but the mood is, people are tired, and that word doesn't, quite even capture it. I mean, the war has been going on nearly 3 years now, and the Kyiv is far from the front, and life goes on in Kyiv. People, go to restaurants and bars and live their lives, but just about everybody, knows or is related to somebody who's fighting, and indeed, most have casualties in their circle of family or acquaintances, and the war is coming increasingly to Kyiv and to the west of the country because of the intensified missile and drone strikes that are, knocking out. I think today, according to my friends in Kyiv, there was only 11 hours of electricity out of 24. And so, some of those are, invariably when you're sleeping. So most of the day, you're making do on a generator or a battery or a power station or candles, and different, everybody's kind of got their system, but better off people have better systems, I dare say, and sort of luckier people, depending on what buildings they live in. But the war is on people's doorsteps, and everybody understands that, absent sort of much intensified aid from the West, it's a matter of time that the Russian resources. Russia just has, a lot more men, a lot more weaponry, a lot more money, a lot more everything, and
getting men from other countries,
and getting men and weaponry, indeed, from other countries, and Ukraine is not, and the situation on the front line is pretty dire, and so it's not a happy moment, and I think. Well, this is maybe an answer to a separate question, but I think people feel that the Biden approach of giving weaponry but too little, too late, and telling Ukraine they couldn't use it in the situations where they needed to use it. There's a lot of, people are grateful for the assistance, but there is also a lot of frustration with that approach, to the point that I think there's some anticipation of Trump, in the sense that people think, well, he's bolder, and maybe he'll, in his boldness, he will turn out to be helpful. I think that's a big gamble. I'm not sure I share hopes about that, but I do think it's somewhat uncertain what Trump will do, and so we're definitely turning a page now. People are the old chapters. People have had just about as much as they can take, and we're turning a page of some kind.
I read in reports, I don't know if they're true, that both Ukraine and Russia are running out of soldiers.
Well, Ukraine is certainly running out of soldiers. Russia, I don't know.
Creates an enormous non-military challenges for things like the economy, for government.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything.
Huge. Well, so companies, it's the number one company. Chambers do surveys, and what's your problem? It's the number one problem is manpower. Yeah. For individuals, I have friends, we can go back to the causes in a minute, but I have friends in their 30s who literally haven't gone out of their apartment for 6 months because they're afraid of running into the recruiting guys. And then, the long-term problem for the country is that the draft age now is above 25. And the reason for that is that because in the first years of independence from the Soviet Union, the birth rate plummeted. And so there are very, very few 18 to 25-year-old men. And the country is going to need them to have, babies.
Sure.
Yeah, and so the U.S. is saying draft them, and the Ukraine is saying no, and they're not explaining sufficiently why they can't, because you can't have a country with no people. And I mean, it looks literally the demographic pyramid. That most countries is a pyramid or at least a pillar. In Ukraine, it's an hourglass, where the sort of the waist of the hourglass is the 18 to 25-year-old men. And so the army is a lot of people who are over 25. Indeed, the average age now is something like 42, and the enthusiastic, well-trained ones have been fighting for 3 years with hardly a break. And now they're trying to draft new 40-year-olds, but they're, overweight and not trained and not particularly motivated, and there's not enough time to train them, and it's not being done particularly well, the mobilization. And so the mobilization issue is a huge crisis, and they are indeed running. So they don't have enough weapons. They're running out of men. Everybody's tired. It's they're kind of at the point of approaching the point of exhaustion.
Yeah. Look, Americans, we know a little about the Russian invasion, but we don't. I doubt any of us, or more than a few in the whole country, know anything about its causes, its historical and ideological context. And now, I don't really want to talk about the long historical connections and tensions between Ukraine and Russia, but I'm thinking about the present sense of national identity in each. And to better understand what's going on, you wrote about this. I thought it was fabulous. Can we spend a couple minutes to get in Putin's head a little bit? So let's talk about Moldova and Georgia and maybe the stands as a way of better understanding what's going on.
Yeah, so Putin has a sense of Russia for the last 300 years, just to have one sentence about the past, has been basically an empire, a big country that got its sense of identity out of the fact that it was expanding, and that it had a huge land mass, and it was always getting more land mass, basically. And I mean, there's hardly been a time when it wasn't, in those 300 years, when it wasn't at some level expanding or trying to expand. And Putin can't bear to be the leader who is presiding over the shrinkage or the disintegration. And so he is determined, to personally, to be another Peter the Great, as he literally cites Peter the Great as somebody he wants to be like, to get more and get the old glorious Russian Empire back. And the Russian people don't have much. There is a lot to be, obviously, huge history and civilization to be proud of, from, Tchaikovsky to Tolstoy to, long list. But the deepest sense of identity is as an expanding empire. And so the idea that Moldova and Georgia and Ukraine and the Baltic countries and all those countries have peeled away is just unacceptable to people, to the point that they are, completely lie to themselves about we didn't invade. We had to stop these people from peeling away. And it's hard to fathom, honestly, really, the sort of depth, the extent to which people have sort of gone to lie to themselves about stuff. I mean, you hear when Ukraine started invaded in the Kursk region of Russia, and Russia started getting a taste of what it's like to be the subject of some kind of military advance, people said, how dare they do this? As if Russia hasn't been doing that for 3 years. So that's kind of the Russian attitude. We're a big empire, and parts are flaking away, and we've got to stop that. And the Ukrainian attitude is, we've been basically the captives of this empire for 300 years, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to be that anymore. And I mentioned before we started, I'm in Estonia, which is another country that was part of the Soviet Union, at least for part of the 20th century, and now is a very independent Western country. When Ukraine didn't break away as completely as some other post-Soviet countries in 1990. It kind of half broke away. So the first 10 years of Ukrainian independence were sort of, we're out of the Soviet orbit, but we're still kind of holding on to our Russian friends and economy and influence and, brothers. And it wasn't until 2014 that significant numbers of Ukrainians realized, wait, we've really got to get out from under this thing, literally. And, the past 10 years have been an intensifying sense of that. And we've got to break away. We've got to become part of the West. We for 300 years and indeed longer, we've been under these people's thumb. We've got to get out. So you've got one country determined to hold on and the other country determined to break away. And that's really what it's about at some fundamental level.
I mean, I can't imagine being, in Putin's head and seeing Georgia want to leave. Georgia was home to Stalin, for God's sake. That's where he grew up.
Right.
So it's a very tough time to be. So that brings me to a different kind of question. And it's one that I think you can help put to bed for everybody. I hear people, including my own brother, who all say that, look, Russian aggression is the result of America breaking promises and expanding NATO. I think Donald Trump believes it, too. Yeah. Your work points to something else, and I want to be sure everybody properly understand it, that, Russian aggression may not be about NATO, but rather driven by this growing chasm between its identity as this expansive empire, really, and the reality being not just the dissolution of the empire, but the promise of better lives that association with the West offers millions of people.
And democracy and markets, I dare say, and freedom. And people in Georgia and Moldova and Ukraine desperately want that Western life, that Western existence, those Western freedoms. And Putin's fear is if they can pull it off in Georgia and Moldova and Ukraine, Russians will start to get the idea, hey, doesn't that look better? And we'll have the same kind of revolt on our hands. It's not only about that, because by that theory it would be enough to repress them. He wants to get his hands on them. But it's a combination, crumbling empire, and look what can happen if that example takes hold on our underbelly. NATO played into that because NATO was, as Ukraine finally decided definitively that it wanted to break away, the EU and then over time NATO became the other thing to hold on to, right? So it's not really that it wasn't that NATO was shoving itself down the Ukrainians' throats. It was that Ukraine was desperate to break away and reached out and tried to grab on to NATO and the EU. So it's a kind of a pretext, but it's a pretext. It's real in the sense that Ukrainians see the EU and NATO as their exit ramp, because there's no such thing as a gray zone, really, between the East and West. What happens in a gray zone is eventually you slide one way or the other. And, for a while, indeed, for the last 10 years, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine have been in a kind of gray zone, and Russia is proving we can't accept a gray zone. We want you back. So you either get your hands on the handle of the EU and NATO and you pull yourself away, or you languish in a gray zone until Putin comes and chews you up. And so NATO's part of the story. It's part of the paragraph. But it wasn't. Again, the West didn't go to Central Europe and say, "Come on, we're recruiting." On the contrary, those countries have been begging to get in for quite a long time, and NATO's been saying, sorry.
Yeah, and this notion of we want, as you say, democratic freedoms and markets and the kinds of things that have led to a more prosperous West. I guess one of the other things, and this would be a big threat to Putin, is this notion of a government that's less corrupt. We want to live in a place.
Indeed, I mean that's how Russia has kept its control over Ukraine for much of these 30 years, right? Especially the first decade. You know, if people were sort of beholden to you by some kind of illegal, corrupt, arrangement, then they weren't really going to break away and join NATO or join the EU. And Ukraine's been making huge strides, right? I mean, the notion of Ukraine as endemically corrupt and everything there is corrupt and it's hopelessly corrupt, that's not fair, because they've been working very, very hard for the last decade to try to clean things up. It's very hard to clean things up. You're changing a whole culture, right? So they still have a long way to go. But that has been part of breaking away from the Russian influence, and they're working very hard on it.
Yeah, later on, if we have time, I'll circle back on America's growing problem with corruption. But I want to read something that you wrote that I thought it came as a surprise to me, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Let me find it. Here it is. In the last year alone, Western intelligence officials say Russia and Russian proxies were responsible for hostile surveillance of a military transshipment hub in Poland, an airport in Stockholm, arson attacks in Warsaw shopping mall, a German weapons factory, and a Ukrainian-owned logistics firm in London, a foiled plot to sabotage a military installation in Germany, and conspiracies to assassinate the CEO of a German arms manufacturer, among other illegal acts. What's funny, what's striking to me, I'll say this, is that does come as a surprise to Americans. I mean, everybody in Europe, certainly Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, is acutely aware of all that. I mean, you've seen the TV show The Americans, right? This is the Americans happening across Europe. And it's not actually, it's the new sort of approach, right? The new Russian approach is not state spies, right? Like if you saw the TV show The Americans, and forgive me to your listeners who didn't, it was people who actually worked for Russia. What happens, and belong to the state apparatus. What's mostly happening now is diplomats got kicked out of Europe and America, over the past 5 years. And so Russia hires literally people like thugs that you can hire on the internet, on a social media for, $50. You say, go blow up that train. And, and they don't even know who they're working for often. So the sabotage is widespread. It includes everything from those episodes that you read, where it's like arson in factories and trains. The systems, the electronic systems that run trains get knocked out. A year ago, again, I'm in Estonia, so I'm hearing a lot about this. A couple of years, more than, a year and a half ago, the Russians came and moved the buoys that mark the boundary. This, and to things like recruiting migrants, right, in the Middle East and forcing them across the border into these countries, creating migration crises. So Putin comes out of the KGB, right? This is his art. This is what he knows how to do. His trade is this kind of stuff, and they're doing it and they're not sending. No one is anticipating tanks in Europe tomorrow. What they're anticipating is this kind of undermining, and indeed, again, look at the elections in Georgia, Moldova, Romania. They almost got a guy elected. I don't know. I can't remember if it was president or prime minister in Romania that was at 5% in the polls 3 weeks before the elections, and on the first round of the election he won because of a massive expenditure on social media that brought him to the public's attention and pretended he did all kinds of things he hadn't done. And the guy almost became president until the court annulled the first round of the elections. So they're people Germany they're worried who's
how much influence will Russia have on their parliamentary elections next year? I mean, it's serious sabotage and cyber warfare and manipulating political opinion to create divisions. Here in Estonia, people say there's more than 1 million cyber attacks every year. I mean, some of them are small, but some of them are serious.
I don't understand the risk-reward trade-off for Putin on all these attacks in the West. I mean, he helped deliver a president here, but I don't think he did that by himself. We did that to ourselves. But he helped for sure.
Yeah.
What I don't understand though is at some point, I mean, maybe he thinks because he has nuclear weapons, it doesn't matter. He can do this with impunity forever. But at some point, somebody's going to start doing it back to him, I think.
I think he calculates that we won't do it back because we'll feel that, blowing up things. I mean, that's sort of the point, right? He thinks that we are playing by the rules and he doesn't have to. And he's sort of confident that our sense of kind of scruple is going to stop us. I don't, and I think there are lots of people in the West who, don't think we should be. I mean, even again here in Estonia, people aren't saying, start blowing up the trains between Moscow and Petersburg. They're saying give more weapons to Ukraine, right? Like the West is still much more comfortable fighting a conventional war than a hybrid war, and I think that's, and we're not doing that enough, of course. But I think that's what Putin is banking on. I mean, and I think what he does is he tests, and when he doesn't get much response, he keeps going. Well,
I'm going to turn to a different corner of the world for just 1 second. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was young, and most people listening to the show are too young to even know this happened. Or I'm too old. But in the late 1970s, the Shah of Iran was ill and getting kicked out of his country anyway. And he came to the U.S. for cancer treatment, and he never went back. And the Iranians said, death to America. How could you be keeping this criminal who we want to bring back here and hang? Mm-hmm. Today, I believe the former dictator Assad from Syria is in Russia. Mm. And I expect the Syrians are going to do something similar. They're going to say, give us this criminal back. Mm-hmm. And Russia has an enormous strategic investment in Syria that helps it in Africa. It helps all over the place. Are they... And I think they're weakened in a big way.
Yeah, I think they are. I think they are weakened. It's not a part of the world I know a lot about, or Syria in particular. But I think they are significantly weakened. But it's my understanding that they're negotiating. They're trying to negotiate with whatever is the beginnings of some kind of government in Damascus to keep those bases. That base, right? They have a big. Yep. They have an air base and a sea base, I believe. I think the sea base is more important, and I think they're negotiating to keep it. And I don't know. Who knows what that guy's going to do? I think that he's the leader of the biggest Syrian opposition group. I think he's kind of a mystery in a lot of ways, and how he'll feel about Russia is way down the list of things we don't understand.
You don't know about. Yeah. All right. Well, so in general, I feel like. From the perspective of the West, even though we're playing by rules and he is not, Russia feels much weakened to me by its own corruption, by its dictatorship, by war, by Western sanctions, by its own people who are looking at folks in their neighboring countries saying, I'm sorry, you guys aren't our future. We are looking somewhere else. So it looks like an opportunity for the West. Not a military opportunity, but an opportunity, a values opportunity to talk about what we can mean for the world.
If only we weren't withdrawing. If only we weren't turning our backs on it.
Well, that's what I want to talk to you about.
And if only that kind of idealism wasn't, basically scorned by everyone. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not. I'm not trying to be to mock you, but I think since the Vietnam era, there's been a lot of skepticism in lots of different quarters in America about whether we mean that kind of thing, and then sort of add the the quote unquote nation building efforts in the Middle East, and people just don't buy that we're good at that anymore, even if they think it should happen. People don't buy that people are skeptical. People think so poorly. Many people think so poorly of the situation at home that they think it's hypocrisy for us to stand for those kinds of things. I mean, I don't think we're. You're sort of, I mean, again, I'm not trying to make fun of the question, but it's sort of as if you're dreaming of, the days when the CIA ran literary magazines in Europe. I don't think we're going back to that. And I mean, that's, in some ways, Ukraine's democratic idealism was so heartening in a way for that reason. But we couldn't even really, we haven't really been as much as we've given them, which we have given them a lot, but we haven't given them enough to win, So that rhetoric is nice, but lots of us don't believe it anymore, and we haven't really lived up to it. I mean, I wish I saw the same opportunity. Honestly, it's heartbreaking, but I don't think I do.
Well, you've gone a place I didn't expect, and I want to explore that a little bit. Do you think in the West, in both Europe and the United States, we no longer believe in the things that we still say we kind of believe in? We don't believe in the same level of freedoms. No,
I think we do, but I don't think we have any. I don't think we have confidence in our governments. I think again, it's mostly on the left, right? But I think the left's skepticism of American institutions and American life and American history, and sort of sense that we never really lived up to those ideals. That's very strong, and that combines with who are we to, or extends to who are we to try to teach other people to do this, and on the right. I don't know. On the right, there's something different or a little more complicated. I'm not immediate, but nobody is on the right, I guess, also feeling like if we're going to exercise power abroad, let's exercise power, and let's do it in more limited ways where it really matters. But I mean, I don't see anybody in America sort of saying, well, let's try to spread our values to the world anymore. I mean, very little of it. And then in Europe, there's a little more of it maybe, but they don't have the muscle to do it. Our muscle. Yeah. We're the only country with the real muscle.
Yeah. Well, so that's interesting. This last election, as sad as the results were, I saw something that I thought was really lovely, and. On the left, the Democrats took back the American flag. They waved it at every event.
They did.
They shouted, USA, yep. USA. Yep. And they kept saying, only in America can somebody like, and then you could fill in the blank, because if people as different as Governor Walz and Kamala Harris end up standing on this stage, they were very proud of
I agree with that. I was heartened by that. I agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, look at somebody. I mean, look at Obama in Syria, right? We have a red line. They can't use chemical weapons, and then he just forgot about it. And I mean,
that was a huge foreign policy mistake. A terrible.
And there's no real money for things how do you spread? There's no real money for things like Radio Free Europe or the National Endowment for, all those democratic. Nobody's spending money on that or thinks it's really going anywhere. And again, we say to ourselves, we tried to build democratic countries in Afghanistan and Iraq, and look what happened. I mean, I think that's what most people say, and so they say, If we're going to do anything abroad, let's extend power. But I don't think anybody thinks that our best. And I'm not saying it should be this way. I would like to see us go back. I don't know if we really tried hard how much difference we could make. I mean, I think you have to find places I think there is a difference between places like Ukraine and places like Afghanistan. In Ukraine, there really are people the whole country is dying, literally dying for these freedoms, and all we have to do is give them the weapons to win. We don't have to go teach them, how that freedom is a good thing, or democracy is a good thing, or women's rights are important, or something. In Afghanistan, we had to start sort of at a, I won't say blank slate, but a pretty empty piece of paper. Ukraine, they're already fighting for it. So I think there's a difference in those two kinds of places. But we haven't even in Ukraine been able to help them really significantly. I mean, for all the money we've poured in, we didn't give enough, and we didn't, Europe. It is interesting being there. Maybe I'm not being fair, but it is interesting being there. For example, on the corruption, the membership in the EU is an incredible carrot, and so the EU has had conditions that have to do with getting the corruption under control that have been very effective in Ukraine, and. I don't think we should have had our weaponry be conditional on reforms, and I don't think NATO should be conditional on reforms. But I think what you want to do is you want to find countries where, the way to do this, if you were going to do it, would be to find countries where there are already people fighting for things and help those people and, and create carrots and sticks to help them move forward. But I don't think there's much of an appetite for it in America anymore. I mean, I don't see it. I didn't see President Biden do it. I agree with you. The campaign was nice, but and I felt the same way watching the Democratic convention, but Biden didn't particularly act that way. Anyway, sorry to be.
He acted very cautiously. He definitely acted very cautiously, and he didn't communicate very much. I mean, what I found odd about the last 4 years of the whole Biden administration, we had a president who was overshadowed by the man who's going to be the next president. Donald Trump got more press during Biden's administration than Biden did.
Yes.
And that's a huge failure of American journalism that will be with us for many years.
Failure too. Biden,
yes.
Biden's made a few good speeches on Ukraine, but he also, was quiet a lot of the time, and again he just held back too much. The stuff that we've delivered, we haven't even delivered any. Look at all the things, the different kinds of weaponry. All the F-16s have come from Europe, and America withheld permission from the Europeans even to give them for a long time. We gave modified weapons that couldn't be used to hit in particular distances. Everything came a year late. We said we'll send tanks, and it took more than a year for them to arrive. So by the time they arrived, the Russians had built fortifications. I mean, we spent a lot of money, but we spent it incredibly badly. And
that's interesting.
We spent a lot of money. And it made all the difference in the world for Ukraine, but it only made the difference that was holding on, not moving forward, not winning.
Yeah, well, maybe winning wasn't the goal, honestly. Maybe weakening Russia was the goal.
See, that's the problem. That's the problem. We were afraid of Ukraine winning and Russia losing. One side wins, the other side loses. And we were, because of a fear of nuclear weapons getting, spread around in a disintegrating Russia Federation, we were afraid of Ukraine winning. So Biden said from the beginning, I'm going to help them, but I'm only going to help them so much, and the war cannot move beyond Ukrainian territory. Well, you can't win a war like that.
Right, but he was worried about a wider war, and that is not an inconsequential worry. I guess Russia's weaker than we thought. Maybe.
I think you let a bully rampage. What you get is more bullying. Yep. You have to push back against bullies.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of other people who think. I mean, the consensus among a lot of Europeans now is that Ukraine has to win, Russia has to lose. I don't know that that's possible anymore. I think that was possible a couple of years ago. I'm not sure it's possible anymore.
Well, that brings me to a different question. it's certainly not the policy of Mr. Trump that Russia should ever lose. Just not. He's never said it. He said. Do you think Europe and the United States will move away from each other?
Well, let me just say, I had an interesting conversation with somebody today, which rang very true to me. Somebody who said to me, Putin will find a way to screw this up. Like, Putin will not be able to, just take a kind of half a loaf and say, thank you, America, and give Trump a win. Putin will find a way to ask too much, bully too far, offend Trump, ruin the deal. That Trump saying he wants to have a negotiation is not the end of the story. Now, this remains to be seen, right? We don't know. Trump could just say, Putin, you can have whatever you want. But saying to Putin, you can have whatever you want, will broadly be seen as a loss for America, and Trump doesn't want that either. So there's no sort of easy path even to complete defeat for Ukraine here, right? That's what's sort of complicated, and a lot has to be seen about, Putin. It will not be hard for Putin to offend Trump in a way that clears the deal. So, well, let's just see. Are Europe and the U.S. moving away from each other? Well, there's no question that the U.S. is, the long arc here is that the U.S. is pivoting to care more about Asia, to withdraw from the world and care more about Asia, right? And, it's unthinkable, right, that Putin should say, we don't care what's going to happen in Syria, stay out of it. It's unthinkable. But that's what he's saying. Let's see what he does, but that's what he's saying. And so withdraw from the world, and to the degree that we're involved at all, to be involved in Asia. So there is a lot of pressure on Europe, and as indeed, rightly, I would almost argue, to do more for themselves. They should be the primary players in Ukraine. It should be Europeans defending the Ukrainian, if there's going to be a Ukrainian ceasefire, there should be European troops, and Europe should spend a lot more on its defense. That's all true. That's, just because Trump says it doesn't mean it's wrong. And I think Europe has been substantially, woken up by the war in Ukraine, and they're trying to pull themselves together to do this. That's very challenging. It's 30-something countries, depending on how you count, EU, NATO, and some of them aren't with the program, and it's hard to organize 30 countries to, imagine asking 30 countries of any other countries to put all their money in the same pot and decide which weapons to buy. That's the kind of thing they're trying to decide to do, right? Big challenge, and to the degree they can do that kind of thing, it goes through an incredible bureaucracy that we all make fun of, right? The EU. So there are a lot of challenges ahead for Europe, but there's no question that they have to step up in a different way, and they're trying to. They haven't done enough yet, but they're trying to.
They're spending more on defense.
They're spending more on defense. They're trying to come together to see, the big thing right now is they don't buy and build stuff together. There was a great paper. There's a great metaphor. You understand it in a flash. A guy who wrote a paper about an EU official who wrote a paper about EU needs to cooperate more and come together to do things, including spend its money together. Tried to travel all around Europe and have listening sessions by train, and he couldn't make the train trips work because the rail lines don't connect. So, the French railroad doesn't connect to the German railroad, doesn't connect to the Belgian railroad, doesn't connect to some other railroad, and so he couldn't go by plane. He had to fly, and it's just that's imagine that translated into making weapons, right? Very hard to pull together, but they're working on it, and we'll see.
Yeah.
Let's hope that,
right,
and they want to stay engaged. Just to answer the question fully, they want to stay engaged with the U.S., certainly as kind of for a while as training wheels, because, even if they build these weapons, a lot of them, you won't be able to use them without U.S. intelligence or without U.S. permission to do certain things. So they're going to, and the nuclear umbrella is going to be really hard to replace the nuclear umbrella. So a lot of these, take time, take money. And America's not going to like it. So a lot of they are going to need America for a long time. We're not talking about a divorce, but the ideal thing thing would be, substantial sort of independence for the, I don't want to call them the children from the parent, but, substantial independence and autonomy in Europe while remaining allied with the U.S. in a strong, healthy, good alliance, for quite some time, right? That would be the ideal. Can that happen? I don't know. Trump, under Trump, we're going to all see.
Yeah. I mean, Putin can screw this up in 11 ways, I'm certain. The thing, I thought about this too a little differently. Not that he would offend Trump, because I think graft will overcome anything with the incoming administration. But I do think that Trump has an uncanny sense for weakness, and he preys on it. And that's been true in his business life, in his personal life. I saw it, the cruelty in the debate he was in with Joe Biden when Joe Biden was clearly not up to it. And if he sees Russia as weakened, that may change his calculation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
He thinks I
think both are possible. I think Putin's offending him is possible too. I think he's a terrible narcissist, but I think both are possibly true. So I think it's going to be quite the psychodrama,
isn't it?
at everyone's expense. That's the.
I mean, to go back to this earlier idea of Western values, which I believe in, and I'm part of the crowd that says we've never fully lived up to them, but I also think they are great guideposts, and I don't have any qualms about that. I'll take on any debate on that topic. But you see Iran terribly weakened, Russia weakened. I don't know what to think of North Korea, but I just think this is a moment when, despite our flaws and despite our mistakes, the promises that come naturally with this culture of freedom that is Western in a way, have a chance to grow around the world.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, obviously I'm going to think about it now. You've planted a seed. I mean, it does worry me that we don't really know how to advance them. And, to the degree that we do, like even again, Europe is sort of advancing values. It's like climate change. I mean, I think that's important, but it's not democracy. And, like the things that we sort of feel we have to export are not, what I would call the central things. And so I don't know. I mean, I hope you're right, is all I can say.
Again, it may not be through through acts of nation building, which we've proven incompetent at for sure. But I spent years in Saudi Arabia, and during those years, the Saudis were sending thousands of students to college in the United States, tens of thousands. And then they all came home, and people were worried there'd be nothing for them to do. Now, Saudi Arabia has not moved in any democratic way. It is certainly not a less repressive monarchy, but the society itself has changed dramatically and created enormous new freedoms for its people. They haven't translated into political freedom, but they are real, and they are economic and social, and that is without that you can't have a democracy. We learned that certainly in Afghanistan. So I think there are all kinds of
markets,
things.
Right? That's really about the markets.
It's markets too. Yep.
People bought stuff in the West, and they traveled to the West, and they. But I mean, I hope you're right. I hope there's sort of some giant pendulum swinging up there that is going to go our way now a little bit. I worry that we've sabotaged ourselves in this last election a little bit on that score. Yeah, well, yeah.
All right, well, in the time we have left, I'm sure interested in getting at two things. Your most optimistic hopes and what worries you the most about a going forward American foreign policy in that part of the world?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, my most optimism right now, sort of realistically optimistic in Ukraine, is I think there will be, I think what's really important, I've said this all along, that what's important for Ukraine is winning the war, but Ukraine also has a lot of, I call it winning the peace. I dare say you could call it nation building to do on its own, right? Like not nation building somewhere else, but Ukraine still has a lot of work to do to take the gains of the last 10 years in democratic reforms, in building functioning markets, in establishing really clear, undeniable, firm rule of law, in kind of fighting back corruption. There's a ton of work to be done. It's not Switzerland or whatever country you want to take as sort of your example. Switzerland's probably not the right example either. But so there's a lot of work. It's not Denmark. It's not Sweden. There's a lot of work to be done in Ukraine, and it was always my hope that they would win the war, and then they would sort of, with a lot of wind in their sails, go back to those nation-building activities, or accelerate those nation-building activities. In some ways, for Ukraine, my biggest hope and my biggest fears now is what's going to happen to those nation-building activities. And I think it's possible that with the right kind of ceasefire and arrangement and basically, narrative to themselves, they can kind of not put the war behind them, but at least decide that the war gives them a reason and a motive and an incentive to go on with that other stuff. If they could say to themselves, well, we lost a lot of territory and we lost a lot of people died, but, we fought for 3 years, not 3 days, and we, killed 1 million Russians, which is going to be pretty soon, 800,000, and we, built a lot better ties to the West, and we sort of, proved ourselves, won the respect of the world, and let's kind of take that as at least a partial victory and use that energy to go back to the rebuilding part and, build up a country that can join the West, even if it's a smaller country, but, a country that's a Western country. That's my biggest hope for Ukraine. I think it's even that is heartbreaking, to fight for 3 years and have to give up 20% of your territory is heartbreaking, and lose all the people they've lost. But that would be the best. That would be saving something out of the jaws of defeat. The fear is that it goes the other way, and that it feels like a complete defeat, and they're cut off from the West, excuse me, and, have to swear they'll never join NATO and don't get in the EU, and, again, slide into a kind of gray zone that, 5 years down the road, Russia attacks again, or Russia uses corruption and disinformation and cyber attacks, and 10 years down the road, basically, Ukraine is a puppet of Russia again. So, that's as far as Ukraine goes. For Europe, I think, again, the key there is it's about choices of how independent and strong and self-confident and, indeed, as you would say, sort of beacon of their values, of Western values can they grow into. And, again, sort of independent of the U.S., but still, in a good alliances with the U.S., not dependent, but related. And I think that will be the best way. I don't think Russia's I'm not expecting really Russia to change that much in my lifetime, maybe fall apart, but not, turn into a democracy, honestly. So I don't have I don't see a crossroads there, but the question will be: can the West sort of get itself together enough that Russia sort of fades away? The empire falls apart quietly, basically.
That's so interesting. I think Russia is becoming a client state of China's, and that China has funded them and has kept them alive, and I think this is it is less to do with Europe anymore. even though Putin doesn't see that. I don't know if he sees it.
Well, I don't think what you say is wrong, but the question is, how will that play out? I don't think we have any idea. What will the U.S. do vis-a-vis China? How will the Chinese? I mean, I think you're right. Weakened client state, but still an entity. And I do think Europe is still. I think there will sort of be a version of what we used to call the Cold War. For decades still, from Europe's point of view.
Yeah, I mean, China has they use markets, interestingly, but not completely freely,
Right.
but they use them. I guess, and this idea of free markets it's such an interesting question, because what at least Adam Smith meant was free of rent-seeking behaviors. It's not free in the way most Americans understand it. Anyway, it's a separate topic, and we've spent a lot of time on it.
But markets matter a lot, right, for standard of living, right? People, if you think that the antithesis is markets versus basically kleptocracies, markets work a lot better, right?
Yes.
Oligarch-driven kleptocracies or Communist Party-driven kleptocracies. The alternative to a free market is that.
Yes.
In a lot of the world, and so that's where markets matter. It's empowerment for the middle class. Anyway,
absolutely. All right. Well, this has been fun. I hope you stay safe and stay well, and that your optimistic views of a maybe de facto smaller state that finds its way into Europe and those Western values, as opposed to those kleptocratic ones, prevails. But again, I really appreciate your time and your
appreciate the opportunity.
It's so thoughtful. All right, everybody, please go. You can read Tamar's work at the Washington Monthly or
Progressive Policy Institute, ppionline.org.
Right. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.